You're watching news at Prime. So let's continue our coverage of International Workers' Day. And joining me for this discussion is Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi and Public Servants Association General Manager Reuben Maleka. Let me start on my immediate left. Mr. Maleka, good to see both of you in person. The general profile of workers you represent as the PSA, and how would you describe the workplace environment in 2025?
Thank you very much, Toli. First of all, let me start by saying today we have seen a missed opportunity by government, because we thought that the president, the deputy president, and the rest of the cabinet does not represent only one federation. And we're disappointed that we could not see a representation of government in all the federation's events.
Right.
There was an event, a lot of events that took place. Cosatu event, we saw the president was there. There was Saftu event, we did not see anyone from government. There was Fedusa event, there was not one representing government. That is very disappointing, because we take it that every opportunity where workers' rights must be championed, government must lead. We have ever expected the Minister of Labour, the rest of our other ministers should have taken part in all the events. So the PSA represent the public service. The PSA represent 1.2 million of the government workers.
Yeah.
People that we talk about, that the police officers, the nurses, the teachers, the general home affairs, and all departments that you can think about.
Yeah.
If one has to represent somebody that has to deal with border management, is where PSA is. If you go to hospital, I was fortunate because this week I was just at Tambo Memorial Hospital. It's shocking. No lights. Can you imagine when you get there, it's dark. As a nurse, you have to walk in the darkness to go and service. You got there, the painting, everything is just demoralizing. And you ask yourself, what has to take government to make sure that they take care of what is called occupational health and safety?
Yeah.
The occupational health and safety in the public service is shocking. One thing for sure, you have just been reporting about the school that burned down. The question is that what happened? And the answer that I have is that it's crime. And we've been saying, as the PSA, the past 5 years, why is government not taking initiative to stop the issue of scrap metals being sold everywhere, anywhere, anytime?
Yeah.
Because the spark of that particular fire, one can attribute to theft of copper. But how many hospitals have been burned down? How many schools? So those are things that government must take initiative about. And we are saying that crime, corruption, maladministration must stop.
Mr. Vavi, my question to you is going to be slightly an unfair one. And I think you're going to have to take it on the chin. You were part of the federation that's going to celebrate 40 years of existence today. Well, that'll be in December, Cosatu. The gains and or missed opportunities that we have seen in the country, you ought to shoulder part of that blame. Yes, you're no longer part of Cosatu. But when you say today, when you stand up at a podium today and say, there's nothing to celebrate, some people are going to say, no, but come on, Mr. Vav, you're not being fair. Lots have changed since apartheid to where we sit today. So try and justify your statement today when you say there's nothing to celebrate for workers.
Well, there has to be a recognition of our victories. From 1886, when 14 workers were moved down by the police in Chicago, to 1918, when there was a first attempt to organize black workers into unions in South Africa, right until 1960, when we were smashed together with the liberation movement by the National Party following the Sharpeville massacre, to 1973, the Durban uprisings led by workers in Coral Brick, 1976 student uprisings, 1982-83 the uprisings of the townships against the black authorities and the rejection of the tricameral parliament, formation of Cosatu in 1985 and the UDF in 1983 up to 1994. And everything in between up to now, 31 years into democracy. Of course, there are many victories, countless victories that we went to celebrate today.
Yeah.
My statement is in the context of today. Today, where we face, firstly, a pointed attack by the government and the employers in the net-leg negotiations. Even there, not that there's been no victories for workers in those negotiations, but we were highlighting what we perceive as an attempt to roll back the gains workers have made in the Constitution, underpinned by the right to fair labor standards.
Yeah.
That fair labor standard is being rolled back through the amendments to the Code of Good Practice that is being negotiated and agreed to by some, surprised because the some will mean not workers.
Yeah.
It will mean that no worker, it doesn't matter whether that worker is a Saftu, Cosatu, Fedusa, Nagtu, or unemployed, will agree that workers on probation must be summarily dismissed without a hearing.
Yeah.
No worker will agree that workers must now confront a new concept called compatibility, which means that the employer now will just say, well, you don't fit with my culture, the traditions and the values of my workplace, bye-bye, no hearing. No worker will ever agree to that there must be no formal hearing and that an employer can sit you down and say, we are having a dialogue. And out of this dialogue, you can go. Or I can write you a letter to ask you, why should I not fire you as an employer? If you write back and say this and this and this, and the employer look in his office conditions, very good salary and best working conditions, say, no, sorry, you have to go. No worker will agree that the principle that when you get retrenched and suddenly the fortunes of the employer changes to the better, you are no longer going to be preferred to be the people who will be employed first.
Yeah.
So we are under attack. That's the context. And there's another thing. We are in a precipice. We are sitting at a crisis of 42% unemployment.
That's the expanded rate.
Of course, that's
Yes.
what we count. Why must we count an unrealistic
32%.
official unemployment rate that doesn't count so many millions of people who have given up searching for employment opportunities? 60% of our young people below the age of 25 are unemployed. 62%, according to the University of Cape Town, 62% of our population lives below the upper bound poverty level of 1,550 rands.
Yeah.
How could you say that's normal? We're not celebrating yes, we acknowledge the victories of the past, but now we are facing an unbelievable pointed attack from our class enemies. They are aided by the people who are speaking very nicely in the rallies today who are wearing political caps.
Okay. Let's bring exactly what Mr. Vavi says, Mr. Maleka, to the here and now. The public sector wage bill, basically the salaries of public sector workers. The Minister of Public Service and Administration confirming this in Parliament, saying that it stands at 724 billion. I think that's the exact figure. Is there worry that workers in the public service, these are people you represent, they may, in the near future, have to accept that there may not be an increment because the government wage bill is simply becoming unaffordable?
Yeah, I think we must differentiate between the public service and the public sector. Let me put it in this way. In 1994, we had 1.2 million public servants. Today, we are sitting with 1.3 public servants. So, and look at the growth of the population between 1994 up to date. Yeah. It's vast. That is why today, the public servants, our members, are under pressure of service. But one thing for sure that is not being told is that this, what is called 750 billion wage bill, who is inclusive of that wage bill? We are talking about ministers. Ministers are part of the public service wage bill. We are talking about unnecessary deputy ministers. What is the role of deputy minister? There's no role.
So why don't you fight it? Whose job is it to fight?
Of course, all society has been calling for that. It's been calling to say, but President, why do we have to, in some instances, they even appoint 2 deputy ministers. What's the point of it? Because in the absence of the minister, the 2 deputy ministers can't act in the position.
They don't sit in cabinet either.
Absolutely. What's the use of that? And one thing for sure that we know is that we've got entities, and that is what we've been saying. When government is unable, ministers are unable to deliver, they create an entity, and that entity is part of it. And we find an entity that comes from a particular department has to earn 5 times more than the DG of the same department.
Okay. We're fast running out of time. Quickly before I go to Mr. Vavi. So there is call it a crisis of the budget that still needs to be passed. But the minister now, he can't rely on the VAT that he wanted to increase. It means there's going to have to be cutbacks in certain areas of the public service. Where does that cut need to be? Quickly.
Quickly. One must learn from Burkina Faso, the president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, in 2022. Right. Today we are talking about a country that had nothing, that had a lot of debts. Today they have no debts. But we will never succeed if the government is run by tenders. If you have to buy a bread, you must get a tender. A bread costs 18 rand. But through a tender, the bread costs 60 rand. Stop tenderizing the state.
So
then you will be able to recover.
Has to go.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Vavi, you and I, not too long ago, were seated exactly where you are, and we were talking about Stilfontein. Stilfontein, yes, we're not talking about formalized workers here, but these are people, some of whom South African, who have been pushed to go underground illegally to eke out a living. Where are we today when, yes, we can celebrate the national minimum wage that has since been introduced, but just how desperate is the unemployed South African who probably has knocked through so many doors, but has now become those people that Statistics South Africa refers to as the discouraged workforce?
The situation is desperate. The levels of unemployment in this country constitute what we have consistently referred to as a powder keg, a ticking time bomb. No country can afford to have 60% of its young people roaming the streets without any hope of ever getting unemployment. We have a structural unemployment that is long-term. In South Africa, 60% of the unemployed people have been unemployed for over 5 years. These young, graying South Africans who have never seen a door of employment opportunity. The situation is dire. When we say 62.3% of the population live below a poverty line of 1,558 rands a month, you're talking about a dire situation. When we say, according to the statistics, 23% of the population is living below the bread line, straight into poverty, leading to, according to reports of the Oxford, 14 million people missing a meal a day, meaning going hungry every day. Then you are talking about the crisis of unbelievable proposition. It is that level of desperation that is forcing men, grown up, former mine workers, and young people who have never been employed to the doors of the shacks of the unscrupulous people who are recruiting them to get them to go and work under the most dangerous working conditions you can imagine. You saw Stilfontein. Workers and people don't even want them because that's how people have been nerved against the foreign workers and documented workers, but they are still human beings. They are still protected by the Constitution of South Africa. When a man takes a rope relying on 15 other workers on the top of the surface to drop him down 2.8 kilometers into the belly of the earth, you must know that that person has been driven to such levels of desperation that he can do anything for a living. That's a condition not just in Stilfontein. This is a condition across the Republic. And I think that a lot of our leaders who get shocked about the state of Johannesburg are not visiting the countryside to see the levels of desperation in the rural areas. It is not coincident, for example, that the people who are being recruited into the Zamazama industries are in the main coming from the eastern side of the Eastern Cape, the Pondo region. And it is the Pondo region that is the face of the rock drillers in the mine. It is they who were the face of the Marikana strikes that lasted more than 6 months with this government ignoring what they were saying, including their demand for 12,500. So everything has its context. I have to come back to the question, please. You were asking against the PSA. I felt that you were advancing an ideology.
How so?
Yes, you are advancing an ideology we call neoliberal ideology. It is not true that the wages of South Africa, public sector workers, have become unsustainable. What is unsustainable is neoliberalism, where the government have shifted the tax burden away from those who can afford to pay more taxes into the shoulders of the marginalized majority, who it almost impose a 0.5% increase of the regressive tax called the VAT.
Right.
It is not true that the South Africa is a poor country, that it cannot afford to employ nurses. We have 200,000 vacancies as we speak in the public service. The wages of the public sector workers have been suppressed since 2020. In fact, in 2020, there was a wage freeze.
All right.
So you are now, without criticism, swallowing and really drinking from this well of them.
Mr. Vavi, I have to...
that everything have fallen apart because of the high salaries of the police, of the nurses, of the doctors, and of the social workers who are providing such a critical service to workers.
I have to stop
and
you.
to the communities in South Africa as a whole.
I take the criticism, indeed, and that is not what I was trying to advance. All I'm trying to say is, if Mr. Maleka argues here that politicians who occupy positions that are unnecessary in government are still getting paid and being protected, that's money gone to waste. So fight it so that it stops. I'm afraid he has taken all of the time. I'm so sorry. You can't have the last word.
Okay, thank you.
Reuben Maleka, thank you so much for making time for us here this evening. And Mr. Vavi, thank you. Thank you very much indeed for making time for this discussion. But it does continue. It doesn't stop on this show.